So, in the United States, your company usually gets fined for a compliance failure, after a massive data breach actually happens.
Right, the damage is already done.
Exactly. The headlines are out, your reputation takes a hit, and then the penalty drops. But over in Europe, under GDPR,
It is a completely different story over there.
yeah, your company can be fined millions of dollars proactively. Just because your structural data protections aren't up to code, before a single hacker even looks at your system.
It completely flips the script on how businesses have to think about risk. You can't just wait for the crash to see if your seatbelts work anymore.
Welcome in, everyone. I am so glad you're joining us for today's deep dive.
It's going to be a good one.
It really is. Whether you are prepping for a massive leadership meeting or, trying to scale a project without losing your mind, or maybe you are just insanely curious about how massive companies actually survive their own rapid growth, you are in the right place.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. Today, we are unpacking insights from a brilliant framework called Tailored GRC, the Strategic Operating System for Enterprise Growth. And our mission is to take what traditionally sounds like the ultimate corporate red tape governance, risk and compliance, or GRC, and turn it into a masterclass on business agility.
Which requires a pretty fundamental shift in perspective. For so long, the business world has treated these concepts as defensive back-office audit functions.
Oh, right, like people with clipboards just checking boxes.
Exactly, checking boxes and slowing things down.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of modern enterprise growth is that governance has to become the actual operating system of the company.
Yes.
Picture a shifting, modern cityscape that's constantly building and expanding. Governance has to be the engine powering that growth, not just the brakes trying to stop it.
There is a concept from the research that sets the stakes perfectly for us today. The source says, in today's digital economy, trust scales faster than technology, and GRC is the currency that buys it.
That's a great line.
It's a massive reframing, right? It turns risk management into the ultimate cheat sheet for growth. And to help navigate all of this, I am thrilled to be sitting across from our resident expert.
Glad to be here. We are really talking about building a corporate structure that has to shift, flex, and grow globally without collapsing under its own weight.
Okay, let's unpack this. The central problem we are looking at is that generic, out-of-the-box compliance frameworks might keep an organization audit-ready, but they rarely keep them market-ready.
Yeah, there's a huge gap between those two things.
And when you just copy-paste a generic compliance framework into a fast-moving company, it feels like buying an off-the-shelf suit.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Thanks. It's like you go to a department store, you grab a generic size 40 regular off the rack, and you put it on. It technically covers you.
You won't get kicked out of the office.
Right. You are technically compliant with the dress code, but if an emergency happens and you suddenly have to sprint down the street...
The seams are going to rip.
Exactly. The seams rip, the shoulders bind. It physically holds you back.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that tearing of the seams is exactly what happens when companies prioritize speed without having tailored governance in place.
It just falls apart.
It does. In the industry, we call the cost of that torn suit compliance debt.
Compliance debt. I love that term.
Yeah, because when you rely on a generic framework, it creates massive friction. You end up with delayed go-lives, frustrated engineering teams, and most critically, an erosion of customer trust when things inevitably break.
I've always hated that old business cliche that risk management is like the brakes on a race car, allowing you to drive fast.
It is a bit overused.
It's overused, and it doesn't really explain the mechanism. I think it's more like building train tracks.
Okay, walk me through that.
Well, governance isn't the brakes. Governance is the process of laying down the steel tracks ahead of the train. If those tracks are tailored perfectly to the terrain, your locomotive of innovation can run at 200 miles an hour without derailing.
Right, because the path is set.
Exactly, but if you just lay down generic, straight tracks without looking at the mountains and valleys ahead, the train has to slow down to a crawl just to survive the journey.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it, actually. Tailored risk management embeds the guardrails directly into the terrain.
Yeah.
When safety measures are built into the track you are running on, you can accelerate complex initiatives like massive cloud migrations or integrating generative AI into your product.
Because the boundaries are already defined.
Precisely. The developers don't have to guess where the edge of the cliff is.
But how does a company actually build those tracks from day one? The source says it starts with looking at a 12 to 36-month horizon.
Yes. Step one is anchoring to the core. Before drafting a single control or writing a single policy, leadership has to figure out exactly what the company is trying to achieve in the next 3 years.
Like, are you pursuing digital transformation? Are you gearing up for a merger?
Right. You have to anchor the entire GRC strategy directly to those core business objectives. Because if you don't anchor it, compliance just becomes busy work.
Wait, I have to push back here.
Sure.
Isn't risk management inherently about slowing down the business to double-check things? I mean, how can leadership realistically tell their teams, hey, we have zero tolerance for risk when it comes to customer data, but also we want you to embrace calculated risk when developing new features?
It sounds like a paradox.
It really does. How do you hold both of those ideas at the same time without paralyzing your engineers with mixed signals?
Well, the paralysis only happens when compliance is treated as a parallel track.
A parallel track.
Yeah, think about it. If the product team is running on track A and the compliance team is running alongside them on track B, eventually track B has to throw a red flag and stop track A to audit their work.
Oh, I see.
That stop-and-go process is what creates the friction and the mixed signals. But when governance is anchored to the business objectives from the design phase, it's all one track.
Give me an example of how that works mechanically.
Sure. Let's look at a fintech startup that wants to roll out a new embedded payments feature. If they treat compliance as a parallel track, the developers build the feature, and right before launch, the security team steps in and says, wait, this touches credit card data.
The dreaded pre-launch audits.
Exactly. The security team says, we need to comply with PCI DSS.
PCI DSS being the payment card industry data security standard.
Correct. It's a highly rigorous set of requirements governing how you encrypt, transmit, and store credit card information.
So what happens to the developers?
Well, if the developers didn't build the architecture to handle that specific encryption standard from day one, they just hit a brick wall.
Ouch.
They have to tear the product apart, rewrite the code, and delay the launch by 6 months.
Just because they didn't know the rules of the track?
Right. But if the GRC strategy was anchored to the 12-month goal of launching payments, PCI DSS requirements become the foundational blueprint.
So they know exactly what to build.
Exactly. The developers build the encryption natively into the code as they go. There is no parallel track to stop them.
And this anchoring concept is massive when companies are preparing for outside investment too, like gearing up for a Series B or Series C funding round.
It is the absolute baseline. Institutional investors and acquirers now demand rigorous, standardized proof that a company's internal operations are secure.
They want receipts.
They really do. They look for compliance frameworks like SOC 2 Type 2 or ISO 20701.
And for the listener who hears those acronyms thrown around in board meetings but isn't quite sure what they mean mechanically, what do those frameworks actually prove to an investor?
Good question. SOC 2 Type 2, for instance, isn't just a certificate you buy.
It's not just a rubber stamp.
Not at all. It is a mechanical proof, audited over a 6 to 12-month period, demonstrating that a company actively monitors unauthorized access, encrypts sensitive data, and strictly follows its own security policies in real time.
Wow, so it's a continuous process.
Very much so. And ISO 27001 is a global standard that proves you have a systematic, continuous approach to managing sensitive company information.
So if you don't have those...
If you haven't anchored your operations to achieve those specific frameworks well before you need funding, you can't just fake it in a week. Investors will walk away because the compliance debt is just too high.
So let's say a company nails that early stage. They get their funding, they build the product natively with the right guardrails, and they totally dominate their home market.
A great position to be in.
For sure. And naturally, the next major goal on that 12 to 36-month horizon is going global. But taking a successful product and crossing international borders changes all the rules.
It really does. The global regulatory maze is where the one-size-fits-all approach completely falls apart, leading to incredibly painful retrofit.
Because the laws are so different.
What's fascinating here is how wildly uneven global enforcement and cultural expectations actually are. We talked about it at the very beginning with the U.S. versus the EU.
Right, the GDPR fines.
Yeah. In the U.S., frameworks like IPA, which protects healthcare data, are largely enforced after a breach occurs.
It's reactive.
The system is somewhat reactive, yes. But in the European Union, under GDPR, the regulatory body can demand to see your data mapping, your consent tracking mechanisms, and your cryptographic standards at any time.
Just out of the blue.
Pretty much. And if those proactive structures are missing, the fines can be devastating.
It's like taking your US electronics to Europe without an adapter.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
You can't just force your American plug into an outlet in Paris and hope the whole house doesn't burn down. The physical architecture of the power grid is different.
Completely different.
You need to build the electrical adaptation into your travel plans. If you wait until you're staring at the wall in your hotel room, your devices are useless.
That structural incompatibility is a huge blind spot for expanding companies. And it's not just Europe.
Where else?
Well, if you are expanding into Brazil, you have to mechanically comply with the LGPD. If you are moving into Singapore, it's the PDPA.
And how do those differ mechanically from something like GDPR? Do they require different code?
They absolutely can. For example, while GDPR is heavily focused on the fundamental human right to privacy and the right to be forgotten.
Meaning you need a mechanism in your database to completely erase a user's history upon request.
Exactly. But frameworks in the Asia-Pacific region might lean much more heavily toward data residency and financial transparency.
Data residency, meaning the physical servers holding the data literally have to sit inside that specific country's borders.
Yes. So you might have built a brilliant, centralized cloud database in Ohio that serves your U.S. customers perfectly.
Sounds great.
It is,
Yeah.
until a localized regulation requires that their citizens' data never leaves their sovereign borders. Then you have to architect a completely new, decentralized infrastructure.
Oh, man.
And if your governance team didn't anticipate that, your entire global launch is dead in the water.
But crossing those borders exposes a company to more than just unfamiliar laws. It completely changes the people who are trying to attack you.
Yes, the threat landscape shifts dramatically.
As an enterprise grows, it fundamentally reshapes its own risk landscape. Traditional, backward-looking risk registers, the ones based on whatever vulnerabilities the auditors found last year, they become completely useless.
They are obsolete the moment you cross the border.
But if these new risks are highly dynamic, and if they are totally unfamiliar to the company, how on earth do you anticipate a threat you have never faced before?
You can't rely on hindsight. This is where companies have to implement horizon scanning and scenario analysis.
Horizon scanning sounds very sci-fi.
A little bit. It means building a dedicated function that actively hunts for emerging threats before the company enters the blast radius.
Give me an example of that.
Let's take a software-as-a-service provider expanding into the APAC region. In their home market, their primary threat might have been financially motivated ransomware gangs.
Bad, but familiar.
Right. But the moment they expand into APAC, they might suddenly face highly sophisticated, state-backed cyber espionage units looking to steal intellectual property.
Wow. So the threat actor fundamentally changes. It's not a hacker in a basement, it's a military intelligence unit.
Precisely. And the defense mechanisms required to stop a state-backed actor are entirely different.
I can imagine.
Another great example is a traditional tech platform, deciding to offer embedded finance-like, allowing users to hold a digital wallet balance.
Okay.
Overnight, they aren't just a tech company anymore. They have inherited banking sector fraud vectors.
So they're basically a bank now.
Essentially, yes. They are suddenly dealing with money laundering attempts, complex transaction structuring, and account takeover attacks that traditional banks have fought for decades.
And if they don't have a mechanism to monitor those specific transaction patterns, they are just blindly walking into a minefield.
Which is why the security apparatus has to scale up massively to meet those new threats.
But there is a massive trap here. We've established that security has to get bigger and stronger. But how do you bulk up your security protocols without accidentally crushing the company's ability to innovate?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because if you take heavy, big company security controls and just slap them onto a fast-moving development team, you are going to strangle the business.
This is the tightrope walk of enterprise growth.
No.
Security cannot stand still. The lightweight safeguards that perfectly protected a 100-person startup will just crumble when you are dealing with millions of global transactions.
Oh, right.
But you have to right-size the security.
Oh.
It has to be proportional to the actual work being done. Scaling with intent, as the paper puts it.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. There is a psychological phenomenon that happens when governance becomes too rigid, often referred to as shadow IT.
Ah, yes. Shadow IT.
For the listener who hasn't heard that term, it basically means employees using unapproved software, devices, or workarounds to do their jobs.
It's incredibly common.
Because if you make the official security protocols too difficult, like requiring 6 levels of approval just to test a new piece of code, employees don't just stop working, They work around you.
They will always find the path of least resistance. It's human nature.
Exactly. They spin up an unauthorized cloud server on their personal credit card. They send sensitive files to their personal email so they can work from home.
Which is terrifying for a security team.
Right. And suddenly, by trying to make things perfectly secure, the governance team has actually created massive, invisible vulnerabilities that they can't even monitor.
That's the danger of poorly scaled governance.
Yeah.
Let's look at the actual metrics of how fast these companies are moving.
Mm-hmm.
Modern cloud-first SaaS companies can double their entire infrastructure workloads in a matter of months. Yes. And if you look at their development teams, they are utilizing DevOps and CI/CD pipelines.
CI/CD being continuous integration and continuous deployment.
Right, which means developers are writing code, testing it, and pushing it live to customers multiple times a single day.
Multiple times a day, wow.
In that environment, the traditional concept of an auditor coming in every 6 months to manually review a sample of code changes is completely obsolete.
It just doesn't work.
The manual audit is dead. Governance has to move from being a gatekeeper with a clipboard to being an automated enabler that lives inside the daily workflow.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult hurdle. Let's say a company does all of this perfectly.
A best-case scenario.
Right. They anchor their strategy, they localize their global frameworks, they anticipate state-backed threats, they scale their internal security so perfectly that no one resorts to shadow IT.
Okay, they've done everything right.
But the problem is, the world is going to change again tomorrow. A new privacy law will pass in California. A revolutionary AI tool will drop, completely changing how code is written. How does a corporate framework survive that level of constant volatility?
It survives through continuous adaptation. The true measure of a governance program isn't how audit performs in a single static audit cycle.
So it's not a one-and-done thing?
Not at all. Static compliance is just a safety net. It only catches you if you fall in the exact spot you expected to fall.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Adaptive governance, on the other hand, functions as a strategic nervous system.
I love that phrase, strategic nervous system. But for the listener who is exhausted just thinking about all of this, doesn't continuous adaptation just mean never-ending audits?
I can see why people would think that.
Yeah, are we telling developers they have to be actively audited every single day of their lives?
This raises an important question, and it's a very real fear for engineering teams. But it's actually the exact opposite.
Really?
Yes. Static controls are what cause audit fatigue because they rely on humans doing repetitive evidence collection over and over.
Like, show me the logs from last Tuesday.
Exactly. Prove to me this was encrypted. It's tedious. Adaptive governance relies on embedded feedback loops and automation.
Walk me through how an embedded feedback loop actually works in that daily DevOps pipeline we were just talking about.
Sure. Let's say a developer writes a new piece of code and attempts to push it live. In a static environment, they wait for a human security review.
Which takes days.
Usually, yes. In an adaptive environment, the CI/CD pipeline has automated security scanning built directly into it. The moment the developer hits submit, a script runs in the background.
Instantly.
Instantly, it automatically checks the code against known vulnerabilities, verifies that the encryption meets PCI DSS standards, and confirms that no sensitive data is exposed.
Without a human auditor ever looking at it.
Exactly. If the code passes, it deploys automatically. If it flags a vulnerable dependency, it automatically blocks the deployment and pings the developer with the specific line of code that needs fixing.
That is incredible.
And the compliance evidence is generated automatically by the system. The system learns from every near miss and incident, constantly updating its own rules.
It's the difference between memorizing the answers to a test and actually knowing how to solve the math problem.
Yes.
Because the test questions are going to change. Threat actors are now using zero-day exploits vulnerabilities that the software vendor doesn't even know exist yet.
It's happening constantly.
And they are using complex API supply chain compromises to bypass front-door security entirely. If you just memorized last year's static compliance checklist, you are going to fail the test.
That is the ultimate synthesis of this entire approach.
Yeah.
Compliance is merely the baseline. It is the bare minimum required to keep the doors open.
Just table stakes.
Exactly. Strategic alignment is the differentiator. When a company builds a strategic nervous system, it shifts from playing defense reactively avoiding risk to playing offense.
It becomes proactive business enablement.
Right. You can adopt new AI tools faster than your competitors because your automated guardrails already know how to handle the data flow safely.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring this right down to the ground for you, the listener.
It's about a total shift in mindset.
It really is. Whether you are leading a team of 5, launching a product to 5 million people, or you are just studying how modern enterprise growth actually functions. Treating governance as an operating system rather than a roadblock is your ultimate competitive advantage.
Yeah.
It is about designing a system that lets you run at top speed because, mechanically, the tracks are perfectly secure.
It changes the entire culture of a company. When employees realize the rules aren't there to stop them, but are actually automated systems designed to help them scale safely, innovation skyrockets.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder as we wrap up today, something that really builds on everything we have explored in this deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If tailored risk management is truly becoming the strategic nervous system of a successful business, the very thing that connects global strategy, cybersecurity, and product innovation, does that mean the next generation of visionary CEOs won't come from sales or product development?
Oh, wow.
Will the leaders of tomorrow actually be chosen from the ranks of chief risk and compliance officers? It is something to think about the next time you are sitting in a meeting discussing compliance frameworks.
That's a powerful thought.
Because the people who know how to build the tracks, they might just be the ones best equipped to drive the train. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, keep diving deep. We will catch you next time.